This is Michael Malak. I'm going to talk about cross-platform development today. So in the beginning, there was Java, but Microsoft embraced and extinguished that. Then there was Flash, and then Steve Jobs killed that. And then there was Silverlight, but by that point it was too late. So we can look at HTML5. There's a rich panoply of advanced APIs available. Everything except that is for unfettered access to the local file system, accessing local files, thumb drives, network shares. You are able to access one file at a time, but not an entire directory. The one file at a time comes from the 1990s, the HTML 3.2 solution, which is still available. It prompts the user to put in a file and it uploads it. But it has the limitation. Well, say you want to scan an entire directory of files, say an entire directory of invoices, and add them up. That's currently not possible. So I look toward some of the heavyweight C++ cross-platform frameworks, Qt, WX Widgets, GTK. I gravitated towards Qt because of reviews on the web, and here you see some screenshots of Autodesk Maya 3D. They used Qt to publish Maya to Windows, Linux, and Mac. Of course, the downside of a heavyweight C++ framework is it's not amenable to porting to the web or to the cloud. So while we're waiting around for HTML5 to come up with an API to access the file system, perhaps some signing capability, I don't know, my stopgap solution is to take advantage of this component out of Qt called Qt WebKit. So out of the many GUI components that come with Qt, one of them is a full-fledged web browser. Qt took WebKit and ported it to Qt. It's called Qt WebKit. So the application ends up being this small C++ shell with a single component where 98% of the code resides in HTML5. So 98% HTML5, 2% C++, just to handle the outside window and the file access. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So it opens up a Windows application. It's a very small application because I'm going to be showing you the source code. And the file open, that's a Qt operation to open up this file dialog. And this is a JSON file. It reads in the JSON file, pumps the contents into a YUI chart, and so we have all the HTML goodness here. Now let's take a look at the steps necessary to accomplish all this. Long list of steps. So you can download this entire slide deck from technicaltidbit.com so you can read it in detail. Qt is a little similar to Eclipse in the regard that it comes with a comprehensive IDE, but no compiler. You're supposed to supply your own compiler. And the options are Visual Studio or MinGW. I tried the MinGW route in Windows. Trust me, just stick with Visual Studio. It's easier. It's also free. You can use the Express version here. It's still available for download May 2013 at this late date, even though Visual Studio 2012 has been out for many months. Download the all-in-one ISO because all the other options are an internet download, and who knows when Microsoft is going to yank those links. The free Express version, you have to select your language up front, so select C++. Download the SP1 for Visual Studio, install it, and also run Windows updates. Now, when you go to download Qt itself, you'll notice on its download page there are two versions, 5.0 and 4.8. That wonderful Qt WebKit is only available in Qt 4.8. And that wonderful IDE you get with 5.0. So you end up having to download both. So start out by downloading 4.8. and download the version for Visual Studio 2010. Then you need to compile it, and you do that by launching the command prompt from the Visual Studio Program folder. It has all the environment variables set up for you. You run configure, and then you run nmake, which is Microsoft's make utility. Make sure you have power save turned off because that process takes 3 hours. Then go back to the Qt download page, download 5.0, and download it for 32-bit. The 64-bit just isn't ready for prime time yet. Then go ahead and launch Qt Creator 5.0, and within that 5.0 IDE, we have to set up Qt 4.8 as an alternative set of libraries. After that's set up, then create a project. We're going to create a Qt GUI application. It starts a wizard. One of the first screens in the wizard is to select which set of Qt libraries you're going to be using. So select 4.8, uncheck the 5.0. To keep our application as lightweight as possible, we're going to change the default base class. The default's to Q application. Change that to Q widget. Now that the project is created, edit the .profile, which is the project file, and add WebKit as a library on the end. Of course, when you create the project, it creates a lot of boilerplate code, which is shown here in white. The blue code is what I've added. This is just the .h file. It's declaring the components. This might look a little familiar in concept to C# and Java GUI programmers. The idea of a vertical box layout. We actually only have one component, but the vertical box layout is the simplest layout, and a layout is required. And then we have the menu bar and then the web component. The CPP implementation, we're just connecting everything together, except for that last line here in blue. This is kind of interesting. This is where we're actually plugging in our HTML code. So remember, we're trying to keep most of our application code in HTML, and this is where we load it and stick it into our web component. Then we go back into the create a couple of files. We're going to create our HTML file and our JavaScript file, and we just create those as general text files from within Qt Creator 5.0. And here are the contents of those two files. The HTML is pretty simple. It's just including the YUI framework, and then the JavaScript. It's kind of interesting because it's declaring a function called load data, and we're going to be calling this function from our Qt C++ code. So our C++ code is going to be calling JavaScript here. And then just one little note here. I was lazy and just did an eval to convert my JSON to a JavaScript object. So not necessarily the safest thing to do. Go ahead and use a first-class JSON parser for that. Of course, you know how to download the toolkit, but I'm just showing you I stick it right in as a sibling to my HTML, JavaScript, C++ project files. This is a convenience thing, so you can just run your entire application by clicking the Run button within Qt Creator. Normally on this hotbar on the left, you just live in edit mode, but go ahead and flip over to projects mode and change your working directory to be the same as your source code directory. Normally this defaults to be the same as your executable directory. The way Qt is set up, it creates this parallel directory hierarchy where it stores all your targets instead of mixing source and targets. The downside of that for our particular purposes is if you try to run out of that destination, Qt is not smart enough to copy over your HTML and JavaScript files, so it's not going to find them. So to sort of cheat, you tell it that the current working directory is actually your source code directory. Then we add our menu handler code. Qt has a little peculiarity where you're actually programming in a Qt flavor of C++, and then there's an extra translation step where that gets translated into real C++ for your real C++ compiler. And it does this to handle events and event handling for the GUI, which it calls signals and slots. So here we're using the Qt C++ syntax private slots. We're declaring our event handler open file. and this is the CPP implementation of that. This is where we're connecting the signal to the slot, the event to the event handler, and then this is the actual event handler code. This is where we're opening up that file dialog. We're reading the local file, the local text file, getting it back as a string, and then we're just passing the contents of that string right into our JavaScript function loadData. So this is where we're calling that JavaScript function from C++. One little gotcha here is that this evaluate JavaScript function has a limitation where it can't handle carriage returns. So in our JSON, we just replace all our carriage returns with space. And that's it. You can download this entire slide deck from technicaltidbit.com.